Good morning. Good morning. Are we having fun yet?
Yeah.
I'm having a ball. I'll tell you, this is the most wonderful convention I've ever been to. And I think someone should make a motion that we hold all our conventions here. We've had such wonderful speakers, and I think we should have them every year, myself excluded. This is really a wonderful place, and everybody has worked so hard to make it so good, and I'm just enjoying the heck out of it. My sobriety date is September the 21st, 1949. I'm from Charleston, West Virginia, but I was born... What? Hey! Nice place to visit, but I don't want to live there. Yeah, I'm an old ridge runner. You know, all West Virginians have one leg shorter than the other because they're used to going around the mountains, and they have to be able to trudge. And they're just poor people. A lot of coal miners, a lot of coal mines. We had, I guess you'd call it a beer bar. In West Virginia, all of the bars could only sell 3.2 beer. And we'd up it a little by pouring a shot of whiskey into it. I thought that was a mixed drink. All the liquor stores were owned by the government. And they stayed open from 9 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening, except on Saturday and Friday nights they stayed open till 10. Well, enough of that. I want to begin by saying that I was born into an Irish Catholic family that they were very Catholic and very strict. My mother was the teetotaler in our family. Excuse my throat, I think I'm getting a little hoarse. Anyhow, they had 5 children, and I was the last one. They couldn't have stood any more, I don't think. But we had a wonderful time. I loved my family. My father was an alcoholic. Thank you, hon. My mouth gets so dry. You know how dry I am? I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. My 2 sisters, one was 11 years older than me, and the other one was 13 years older. My brothers, one of them was 7 years older than me, and the other one was 5 years older than me, and he was the meanest kid God ever put on this earth. He made my life miserable. We'd go to school, Catholic school, and every morning he'd tell me, Katie, you're not Mom's little girl. You're adopted. You came from the Labaldo family. This was an Italian family that had 10 million kids And I was one too many, and they gave me to my parents. He'd have me crying every day going to school, and I was afraid to ask my mother. I was in high school before I asked her if I was adopted. I was afraid of the answer, and I couldn't have handled it before then, but she laughed. She thought that was the funniest thing. All those years I suffered not knowing if I was my mother's little girl. I'd get to school, and tears would just be streaming down my face. And the nuns would ask me, Katie, don't you, Kathleen, they didn't call me Katie, Kathleen, don't you like school? And I said, I love school. And she said, well, then why are you crying? I said, I can't tell you. So this was my routine every day. My brother also, like I told you, he was mean. My mother gave us 5 cents every morning to buy milk for our lunch. She packed our lunch, but I could buy milk at the school. Instead of buying milk, my brother bought cigarettes. They had wings. I don't think they even make them anymore. And they put 10 wings in a little carton, and it was 5 cents for 10 cigarettes. Well, every time I wanted him to do something, or he was going to do something to me, I'd say, I'm going to tell Mom you smoke. 5 years old. I'm going to tell my mother you smoke. And I'd get my whatever I wanted him to do. One cold winter morning, we were walking to school. He pulled out one of his cigarettes and lit it, and I was freezing to death. And he said, oh, this makes me so warm inside. He said, here, take a puff. And I was so cold, I was willing to take a puff of anything. So I took a puff of his cigarette, and he said, now, I'm going to tell Mom on you. Oh, he was mean. But to get on with my story, the first time I was ever drunk, oh, I forgot to tell you, my father was a CIA, Catholic Irish alcoholic. And that was the only thing I inherited from him besides my height. I'm 6 foot tall, and I haven't shrunk an inch, and I'll be 83. How about that? My claim to fame. Anyhow, senior moment. The first time I was ever drunk, I was 11 years old. And we were at a Thanksgiving party, and everybody was drinking wine. All my family were drinking wine, sipping wine. My father wasn't around then. And one of my family members would say, Katie, didn't you get any wine? I said, nope. Here. They filled me a little cheese glass full of rot gut something. I don't know what the name was. Anyhow, it was sweet and it was good. And I didn't sip mine. I drank mine down. See, I had alcoholic drinking from the day I was born. I just didn't know it yet. And I drink that one down, and another member of the family, you know, brothers and sisters and their chosen people, and they would ask, different ones of them would ask me, did you have wine, Katie? No. I knew if I said yes, I wouldn't get any more. And that was the beginning of my alcoholism. From that day forward, I never took one drink. I had one and I had them all. That was the compulsion. It just set that up in me, and I had to have more. Well, when I got down to when I was at the dinner table, my alcohol caught up with me, and I passed out. And my mother, if she thought she was going to have another kid like my father, she'd have probably given me the gas pipe right then. If she only knew what was to come, I'm sure she would have given me the gas pipe. And I love my mother very much. She was a stabling factor in our family. And it was just hard for her because my father was an alcoholic, and he was a salesman for furniture. And he went into the coal mines and sold the coal miners furniture, bedroom sets, and he guaranteed to stand behind every one of them. But it was a life that he could drink when he wanted to, and the coal miners didn't care. And it was a tough road for us because he drank up all the money that he made, and we didn't have anything to eat many times. And my mother was a whiz at managing money. I wish I'd have taken that after her. And she could squeeze a buffalo nickel and it would scream. She got more out of money than anybody I ever saw. And my father gave her $5 a week to feed 7 of us for the whole week. And, that was impossible. But in those days, things were very cheap. But of course, you didn't make much money either. And it was a dog-eat-dog society. We had many, many problems with my father, and I saw the degradation that we had just from his drinking. And I swore, I'll never drink like he does. That was a wild assumption. When he was around, it was always chaos. And I really hated to see him come home because he would always be argumentative. He was a fighting drunk, and it was very unsettling to our whole family. And my brother and I came home from school one day and found my father choking my mother to death. And my brother, he was 13. He was 5 years older than me. And he picked a candlestick up off of the mantel, and he let him have it right on the head and knocked him out. We called the police. They took him away, and that was the last I saw of him. He wasn't allowed to come back to our home. There was a restraining order against him. So every day, or every Saturday, I would have to go up to the furniture store and get the $5 that we were supposed to eat on all week. And my mother, she was a wonderful cook. Oh, she made the best bread in the world. And she could stretch food like you never believed. It was just phenomenal to watch this woman operate. Well, I stayed on the wagon after that Thanksgiving. And I didn't touch another drop until I got in high school. And this was when World War II, not one, but two. And everything was rationed, and everything was, you had to budget everything. Alcohol was rationed, cigarettes was rationed, meat, we had coupon books, and we just had, that much and nothing else. Well, like I say, my mother could stretch anything. And when I finally got to high school, and here's some of the kids, they were drinking beer and wine, and I thought, boy, I wonder what that tastes like. Now, I was 6 foot tall in school, and when I went to high school, and I weighed about 125 pounds. I was the American version of Twiggy, if you remember who Twiggy was. I was so tall and so thin, they called me Stretch. And I thought I was something else because I had the nickname, and everybody knew who I was. I could dance. I could just dance jitterbug. We used to go down to Fred's Park. That was a drive-in. And we'd go inside, and my mother always gave me 25 cents for lunch. And you go down there, and you could buy a hot dog for 15 cents and a milkshake for 10 cents. And there was always somebody there that had a nickel, and we put it in the jukebox, and we'd dance the whole hour away. I loved it. But I found out that I could drink better. I could dance better if I had a drink. So I really could. I was so relaxed. All through high school, I wanted to be a cheerleader. I so envied this little 5'2", blonde, blue-eyed cheerleader, and I wanted to be her so bad I couldn't see straight. Well, in high school, and the first drink I got, I immediately turned into this blonde, blue-eyed, 5'2" cheerleader with pom-poms. And that was amazing to me. I thought, oh my God, no wonder the old man drank. This is marvelous. I can be anybody I want to be. And I could dance better, and I could sing better, and I could do everything better. That was the answer to my prayer. I wanted that booze. And the minute I took one drink, it wasn't enough. When they say one drink's too many and 1,000's not enough, I believe that. And we went to football games on Friday night, but we'd be under the bleachers drinking our booze and having a heck of a good time. I don't know who won what, but it sure was fun, and nobody looked for us under the bleachers. And that's where I was every Friday night, high school football game. And that lasted all year. I did manage to graduate from high school, and that was a big accomplishment for me. I wasn't good at math. Still I'm not, although I was a bookkeeper for years. I don't know if they ever straightened out those books. Well, I finally graduated, and I went to business school. And I learned typing. Well, I learned typing in high school, but I learned to run all these different kind of machines. And I went to work for Carbide and Carbon Chemicals Corporation after I graduated. And Kanawha Valley, which is where I live, was full of chemical plants because We were sheltered by mountains, and it wasn't a very affluent population, but it was my hometown, and I loved it. Well, they treated me very nice, and I was working in an office with 2 women, and the rest were men, and I thought that was a pretty good ratio. And the other woman was just the sweetest soul. She took me under her wing, and she taught me, what the work was that I was supposed to do. And we became very good friends, very close friends. And she was always telling me about this big brother that she had up in New York. And I thought he must have been a knight in shining armor, because she just praised him to the ends of the earth. Well, my drinking had progressed so much that they didn't fire me, but they kept moving me to different departments. They were convinced that it was people I was running around with that caused me to drink. Because, like I say, I didn't know what would happen once I took the first drink. And I had just a craving that I had to have that all the time. Now, they didn't have drugs. I knew there were drugs around because the band leaders used to be hooked on cocaine and, all that sort of stuff. But it wasn't for the general public, Believe me, if they had had them, I'd have taken them. Because I had trouble getting rid of bottles. And if I just had a beer, that wasn't enough. At noon, I would go down to the liquor store. And then, when I was telling you about the rationing, it was so funny. I was tall, and I could go in the liquor store, and I could ask for whiskey. It was rationed, but I drank stuff like King Corn and Cotton Picker, and all of them were guaranteed to be 30 days old. And it was only $2 a pint. And I thought I'd found heaven, because a pint would fit in my purse well. The only problem I had with that, it used to gurgle. And I was soon carrying my bottle to work. I couldn't be without it. I was afraid to be without it. I was that dependent on it. And they changed me around to different departments, thinking, that would help me. And sometimes I got to work, and sometimes I didn't. And the longer the longer my term was, it was just pitiful. Sometimes I didn't go to work for 2 or 3 weeks. I'd be on a drunk, and I couldn't go home because my mother wouldn't let me drink in the house. She didn't want me to drink any place, but I knew she'd pour it out if she found it. I know one girl, I've learned so much since I've been in AA, because we had an old-timers meeting. Lee knows all about those. He was right there. And senior moment. Anyhow, I was talking about Lee. He's my lover. I knew I'd get him. Anyhow, things just came from bad to worse, you know, and finally they told me, Katie, we're going to send you over to Ford, Bacon, and Davis. I told them, though, in one of these instances where they were giving me my last chance, and the funniest thing, I knew nothing about AA. I'd never heard of it or anything else, but I used to go to this beer joint with my booze and the bottle, and there was a man that used to come into the beer joint every evening, and we really had a club in this beer joint, you know, where we all drank together. And so this man used to come in every evening, and he'd stand at the bar and he'd drink a Coke. Well, I kept watching him doing that, and finally I asked somebody, I said, why does that guy come in here and every evening and just drink a Coke? He owned a restaurant right across the street, and I knew he had plenty of Cokes over there. But he liked that atmosphere. And one person that I asked told me, said, he used to be a terrible drunk, but he joined Alcoholics Anonymous, and he doesn't drink anymore. Well, now, for some strange reason, that stayed in my brain. I know the reason, but, you know, I want to make this suspenseful. Anyhow, that stuck in my brain. And so one of the last times they were going to fire me, I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go to Alcoholics Anonymous. Of course, they didn't know anything about alcoholics either. So when I got home, my mother was ready to throw me out of the house. And when I got home, I told Mom, I said, I'm going to join Alcoholics Anonymous, because she was getting pretty fed up with me. And she said, what's that? And I said, I don't know, you find out about it and I'll join. Well, I thought it was safe because she never drank. And how would she find out about Alcoholics Anonymous? You know, I drank and I didn't know anything about it. So a couple of days later, she told me when I came home from work, she said, Katie, don't go out tonight because a lady from Alcoholics Anonymous is coming to see you. How'd she do that? Darn. And I sat there and I thought, good heavens, what is this person going to look like? You know. And in walked this lady. She was absolutely beautiful. She was about 65, and she had on the most beautiful clothes, and I always loved clothes. And she had her hair just perfect. And I took one look at her and I said, she probably had one too many sherries at her bridge club. She sure didn't look like me, you know, sloppy and not caring too much what I looked like or anything. Well, when she told me part of her story and part of what AA was about, you know, and I thought, my mother told her what to say. I know she didn't drink like I did. And we clean up nice, don't we? And so I agreed to go to a meeting with her. Well, we go to they only had one meeting in Charleston, West Virginia at this time. I was 21 years old, and I walked in there with all these old people. And I thought, oh my God, what have I got myself into? I mean, there were some nice dressed ones, but a whole lot of them, lived under the bridge and all that sort of stuff, and it was terrible. And I thought, I have nothing in common with these people. Look at them. Well, there were some nice dressed people too, the ones that had a little bit of sobriety, And there were no women in a very few women. And but I was lucky. I latched on to a bunch of them, and they all 12-stepped me. I had 6 sponsors. I could have used 6 more. But they were telling me things like, you can't be an alcoholic, you're too young. And I thought, hot damn, this is what I want to hear. Because I knew I wasn't an alcoholic, I just needed a little control. I just wanted to drink and not get into trouble. These old guys would come up to me and he'd say, I spilled more whiskey than you ever drank. I said, well, if you hadn't spilled so much, maybe you'd have gotten here sooner. And that's the truth. But I had trouble with the wives. They didn't care for me. I represented all the women that their husbands cheated on with, and they were very nasty to me. I get even with them, though. I had no resentment. I got even. And I'd kiss them on their old bald heads and send them home, And I was so happy to be sober, I think I was sober a whole month. And I thought I had it made. So I decided, well, I can drink, because they say I'm not an alcoholic. I'm too young. Of course, I went out when I heard that. I'd have a beer. I can handle a beer. False. Nothing with alcohol did me any good. I had a terrible time. I couldn't even drink cough syrup that had alcohol in it. They told me what everything had alcohol in it. Read labels, and you'd be surprised how much alcohol is in the food we buy. Anyhow, I knew one girl, she used to get drunk on lemon flavoring because it had more alcohol in it than vanilla did. And she used to carry a bottle around with her all the time, and take a sip whenever she wanted. Well, to get on with my story, they finally found a man over in another company that was in AA. He was a little Scotsman, about that tall. Looked like a little leprechaun. And of course I took my bottle to go over there because it was out, in the boonies, and there was no liquor store around. So I had to take my bottle to work with me. And I did. So I took my bottle in, and Mr. Beaton sat me down, and he said, now, Katie, this is your last chance. Believe me, it is your last chance. If you drink, they're going to fire you. Because they had, of course, told them my life story, and he knew what he was talking about. I had the greatest urge to give that man my bottle. But I was afraid to. I was afraid I would need it, and it wouldn't be there. I knew, after I got sober, I knew that man would have given me a drink if I'd needed it. if I had given him the bottle, but I couldn't trust anybody that much. Well, I did get sober, and I was sober 3 months. But when I went to work there, there was this man that came down. He was a chemical engineer, and he came down and he said, "I think you know my sister." I said, "No, I don't." He said, "Yes, you do. Peggy Garrett. This was the woman that took me under her wing when I first started working." And I said, "Are you her big brother from New York?" And yes, he was. Well, he was a field engineer, and he wore the regular field engineer's clothing. But he was tall. He was 6'3", and he had sport shirts, flannel sport shirts that came about to the middle of his arm. They didn't make clothes then for men, arm length and everything. What you got, you either had to roll them up or scrunch up your arm. And I thought, my God, that can't be her good brother from New York. And he'd come down, he'd take me up to the cafeteria for coffee, and we'd talk. But Mr. Beaton says, "Katie, I'll pick you up tonight and we'll go to a meeting." And I said, "Okay." So we went to an open meeting, and I looked all around, and I spied this guy. He was good looking. Had on a nice blue suit, had on a white shirt and a red striped tie. And I immediately fell in lust. But this was in about October, and in October. Anyhow, the Christmas, I stayed sober. I stayed sober 2 months. And Christmas came. And of course, with all the parties that I was invited to and all my drinking buddies, we had parties, and I fell off the wagon. And there I was, back in the same old place that I had thought I was safe. It was just horrible. And they did fire me. They meant it that time. So I had a savings account. You put in $1 and the company would put in $1. They'd match it. So I had a pretty nice little nest egg. I had over $600. I was flying high. Boy, I had money. I could drink as much as I wanted. My mother had thrown me out. And I went into this little residential hotel. And it was old. I mean, it was old. It had claws on the bathtubs. Remember those old claws in the bathtub? And the springs, no covering on them, they were just the springs. And then the mattress went on top of that. And they were all these old iron bedsteads, the top and the bottom. Well, I thought, my darn, I'll just have a good time. And it was only $15 a week, so my money was going to last a long time, I thought. And I was about 6 months or 6 weeks drunk. And when I drank, I never ate. And I lived on the alcohol. Well, this last drunk that I had, the 6 weeks drunk, I had everything. I had alcoholic paralysis. I had DTs. I had convulsions. And I was a mess. And there was nobody that I could call on. Well, this hotel where I was, I could get the bellhop a couple of dollars and he would get me a pint of whiskey. So that way I didn't even have to go out. I didn't mean that, John. Here I was in seventh heaven with all the booze I could have, and I had these terrible things happen to me. When I had DTs, I was laying there in the bed. I never went out. I always stayed right in the room. I was drinking for oblivion, is what I was drinking for. And nobody loved me. The AAs got tired of me. You know, they knew I wasn't going to stay sober, so why bother? We'll just, ignore. And they did. And I couldn't call on any of them. I couldn't call on my family because they had all disowned me. And I was a pretty sad cookie. But those DTs were something else. First thing, I saw little Boston Terriers. My father used to raise Boston Terriers, and I always had one. They were just about, an inch and a half, 2 inches high. And they were all over the bed. And every time I started to pick one up, it disappeared. And I'm like, what in the hell's wrong with those dogs? I love Boston Terriers. I have 2 at home. Used to have 3, but I had to put the old ones down. And I'd always been with Boston Terriers, and they were such loving, sweet dogs, And I wondered why they wouldn't let me pick them up. And then the curtains started talking to me. And I thought, what's going on here? There was nobody else in the room. It had to be the curtains because it was summer, it was warm weather, and here the breeze was coming in and the curtains were flying in, and I can't remember what they said, but they were talking. Then I saw this big cat come over the big bedstead, had no legs. It was covered with yellow axle grease, and it had a head about that big on it. And it crawled over the end of the bed, and it started slithering up my body. And it turned around on my chest and stared me right in the eye. It scared me to death. This big old cat. What was wrong with it? How come it didn't have any legs? How come it was covered with all that axle grease? It was terrible. It had those yellow eyes, and it just bored into me. Well, it finally went away. I saw a man in my window. I was on the 3rd floor of this hotel. There's no way he could be in my window. And he had overalls and a plaid shirt, and he had on a brown hat that had the sweat stains around the rim, And he was talking about me. He'd yell at somebody down on the floor, on the street, and he'd just be talking away to him. I knew he was talking about me. And then he'd look at me and point, Scared me to death. I wondered how he got up there. Well, you only get DTs when you stop drinking. Because if you don't eat, it eats up all the nourishment. Well, I didn't know what I had, but it scared me so bad. And there was nobody there. Nobody that I could call on. And you know, when I went to the Catholic schools, back then they used to tell you about a vengeful God. You better be good or God's going to get you. And I knew he was going to get me. And I didn't want to know that kind of God. I was always afraid even to pray to him because I didn't have that connection with him. I didn't want him to notice me. And I used to pray to the Blessed Virgin, and that was a woman, and she was a mother, and she would understand. And it was just things that I heard in AA, and they were telling me about this loving, forgiving God, and I couldn't believe it. I didn't believe it. I didn't want to hear about that God, you know, and I wondered why I couldn't stay sober. You have to have a psychic change. And you know, all those people that said, I've spilled more than you drank, found out they were wrong. Because I drank for 3 years, and I'd be in and out of AA. I'd go back because I knew I needed them. And when I would go back in, they'd say, here she is again. You know, and even they didn't want me because they knew that I was never going to get sober. Oh, if they could see me now. I fooled them. But when I finally did call on this God, I was so desperate. I was so sick. I knew I was dying. No one could live feeling the way I did. So with all the desperation I had, I called on this God that they talked about, this loving God. And all I could say was, please help me. The most wonderful feeling of peace filled me. And I realized that there was a loving God. I knew, I felt his presence. And it just felt like I was wrapped in a warm blanket and I was being held in the arms of God. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, all this time that I've wasted when I could have called on him many times before, but I was just afraid I couldn't do it. I thought about that feeling and I was mystified. I couldn't believe it. And when he helped me that afternoon, this woman that I had known in AA, she had one of these, like my voice is tonight, today, you know, it's so hoarse. She had a whiskey baritone voice. And it was very distinguishable. I knew who it was immediately, and I thought, oh my God, the DTs are back. I heard her out in the hall, you know, and she was talking to the bellhop and everything. And I said, that can't be her. Of all the hotels in that city, why did she pick that one? Why was she moving in right next door to me? Because I called down at the desk and I said, do "Do you have Regina Rogers listed?" And he said, "Yes, she's moving in right next door to you." Couldn't believe that. And I said, "Would you please give me, ring her room for me?" And he said, "Yeah." So when she answered the phone, I said, "Regina, this is Katie, and I'm right next door to you. I have something to tell you. I don't understand." I said, "But I'm sober. I'm sick, but I'm sober." And she dropped everything and came over to my room. And I explained to her what happened, this wonderful feeling that I had. And I knew there was a God. I knew He came to me. I was so convinced of that. And she said, "Katie, you've had a spiritual awakening." Now, of course, it had to be a burning bush, because after all, look who I was. And God had helped me. And it was such an awesome thing that it was a miracle to change that quickly into knowing I was going to be taken care of. God was good to me. God was looking out for me. I had the deepest faith that moment than I've ever had in my life. And I've kept that faith. I don't go to church. And I didn't feel anything in church. But I felt things in AA. I felt that presence. I felt the spirituality that comes from you people. And it saved my life. And I've never forgotten that feeling. And I still have it today. No matter what happens, I know that I'm going to come out okay. Well, this wonderful man that I lusted after, he started calling, because Regina told him I was sober now. And I'd had a spiritual awakening, and she was very hopeful that I would stay sober now. Well, when he found that out, he called Regina and he says, "Do you girls have a way to the meeting?" By then, they'd had more meetings than just one. And she'd say, "No." He had a car. He says, "I'll come by and pick you guys up." I wanted that man. And I said, everything I could think of, everything that had worked for me before, I had no trouble getting a man. I guess they felt like they'd conquered something, 6-foot woman. Well, and it was funny, I always liked the little short ones. Because they were so grateful. Made a big man out of him. Oh, Lordy, I had fun. Anyhow. This one wasn't falling for it. He had a year's sobriety. A whole year. I couldn't imagine anybody staying sober a whole year. What was wrong? Well, pretty soon Regina wasn't going with us anymore. I took care of that. And we'd go to meetings. He'd take me to meetings, and lots of times we'd go to different members' houses, you know, and play cards or whatever, have a cookout, something. And I wondered, what in the heck has God done to me? He gave me sobriety and took away my sex appeal. And I didn't appreciate that very much. I was sure I had lost everything. Well, as time went on, what he was doing was protecting me from the 13 steppers. You know what a 13 stepper is? Yeah. There's a few in here. So anyhow, it finally got to the thing, you know, he'd kiss me on the cheek goodnight when he'd take me back to the hotel. I tried to turn real fast. He was too quick for me. He knew what was coming. Well, I finally got a year's sobriety. And oh my God, it was wonderful. A whole year, and I was sober. And he said, "Would you marry me?" My God, I couldn't believe it. I almost fell out of the chair. Speaking of falling out, you should hear what happened to me this morning. I was leaned over. You know how high those beds are? You know how slick they are? I leaned over to look at the clock. And I just kept on going. Oh my God. And my dear friend Patty, she tried to get me up. It wasn't clear down on the ground, but I have marks on my legs here where the, the box spring or whatever that is, how hard thing is, the springs. And I was fighting going down because I knew they'd never get me back up. I don't weigh 125 anymore. But that was the darndest thing. We called Patty. She struggled. She tried to get me up, and she was doing a good job. But finally, she had nothing left. And so I said, "Call down at the desk. Get somebody up here." So they did. And here it was 8:15. Oh, God, I had to be down there by 9:30 anyhow. And I was so exhausted from, you know how slick those rugs are? I couldn't get any traction. And Patty had to stand behind me to keep me from slipping down any farther. And she pushed and she shoved, and the poor girl just wore herself out. God bless her. She was wonderful. She's a nurse. Always take a nurse with me. Just in case something like that happened. So when the security came up, and there was 2 kids. Skinny kids. And they said, "We can't do anything. We can't touch her because if she's hurt, she could sue us." I said, "I'm not hurt." Pick me up. Couldn't convince them I wasn't hurt because my toes on that carpet, they were bloody because, the friction on the carpet. And he says, "Her toes are bleeding." I couldn't see the toes, but I knew what was happening. Anyhow, here I was hanging onto that mattress for dear life, and poor Patty standing behind me so I wouldn't slip down any further. And I thought, oh, I was so exhausted. I said, there's no way I can go. But I knew I had to. I didn't want you all to miss this. I always think of others. So much for that. I was pretty shaky, though, because I had put through so much effort trying to stay on the bed. She got me up to about my thigh, and I was holding on for dear life. Well, the security wouldn't do anything, so Patty gets her cell phone out, and she calls Fred, my guardian angel. And he comes, and he says, all right, here's what we're going to do. And boy, he swerved me around, and I was on the bed, feet and everything. Yes, Fred. He's a good friend of mine. Anyhow, he was an angel. So I finally got settled down. Not that I could come talk to you guys, but that's the reason I know I'm not coherent much of the time, but it really shook me up. Anyhow, to get back to Dana, I looked at him and I said, just wait. So I told him, I said, I didn't even think you liked me. You know, he wouldn't let me kiss him or anything. And he said, Katie, I loved you. He said, but your sobriety meant more to me and for you than any desire that I might have. Oh. I've never heard that since. And I bet you haven't either. He was a wonderful man. He was so kind to everybody. And he was so smart. He was an engineer. And he was just everything I ever dreamed of having. I really loved him. And he taught me the program of AA just by watching him. I watched what he did. I watched the way he treated people. I usually went for the good-looking ones, you know. I treated them nice, but everybody else. But I learned so much. It was just a marvelous experience. And we got married, and we had 3 little girls. Beautiful kids. And I thought I had died and gone to heaven because this was everything I ever wanted. I wanted a home of my own. I wanted sobriety. I wanted my babies. And most of all, I wanted him. And when we were married 11 years, and he died of cancer. He was sick 2 years. And I tried to get used to this. I tried to think, what will I do without him? Because back then, they didn't have anything but radiation to treat cancer. And he had cancer of the esophagus. And he went to Johns Hopkins Hospital to be operated on. But when they opened him up, it had spread through his chest. And it was inoperable. They gave him the radiation, and I knew what cancer did to people. And I just couldn't imagine that I could ever live without this man to guide me, to teach me, to love me. The day finally came when he did die. He said, I want to take the kids to, we used to go to Cherry Grove, that's in South Carolina. And the beach there was wonderful because it went out way out before, you know, the kids could go half a mile out and still be okay. And he said, I want to take them there for one last time. I said, okay, let's go. So we went, and he swam with them, and he, you know, just spent every minute he could with them. And so they would have happy memories of him. And the second week, we were going to stay for 2 weeks, but the second week he started getting short of breath. So I took him into Myrtle Beach to the hospital there, and the cancer had eaten through his chest wall, and all of the fluid that he drank he was drowning. And the doctor stuck a needle about that long through his ribs and drew out the fluid. And he said, start for home. He says, don't stop, just keep going. So I had these 3 little kids, I had 2 Boston Terriers, and we started for home just as soon as we got back and packed. And I drove all night, not daring to stop. He wanted to stop. He said, I'm having a hard time. I want to stop. And I said, no, we can't. We had to keep going. So when we finally got into Charleston at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and they took him right in, and I called Dr. Loft. That was his doctor, and he came and he told me, he said, Katie, I could drain his lungs again, his chest again. But he says, do you really want to put him through that? I said, no. I didn't want him to suffer. So I hadn't had any sleep all night, and I called my sister-in-law to come up to the hospital and take my kids home. Well, he died that night, and I wasn't there, and I hated that I wasn't with him at this last parting. You know, I would have probably followed him if I didn't have those kids. I couldn't imagine life without him. I couldn't imagine. But you know, we've got a thing in AA that's the most beautiful thing in the world. My friend, Judy Taylor, she just died a couple of years ago. Maybe you all knew her from the gratitude dinner I spoke to a couple of years ago in Fort Lauderdale. And she was with me. She drove me down. And I loved that woman. I knew her from the day she came into AA, and when she died, she had lung cancer. And she had 21 years of sobriety when she died. It was wonderful. But she used to have a saying. She would always say, you know, whenever anyone is experiencing life's troubles. It's like the Old West when they were crossing the country and they said, this is what we'll do when the Indians come. They formed all of the wagons in a circle. Oh God, 5 minutes. I can't finish in 5 minutes. Okay, anyhow, I'll talk faster. That's what happens. Every time I had a problem, like my husband when he was sick, the wagon circled, and I was safe. I was never alone. I had these 3 little girls, and I had AA, and it was beautiful. I was so grateful for the friendships that I had in AA. I got married again 4 years later, and he was in AA also, but he wasn't quite the guy. Anyhow, the kids loved him. And he passed away also with lung cancer. So I thought, I'm not going to do this anymore. Well, I didn't have to. I have lived 21 years now without a husband, and I'm happy as I can be. God, I can go where I want to go. I can do what I want to do. I can go to AA all day if I want to. I'm so free. When they say free, I'm free, and you remember that. God bless all of you. I love you.